Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Again, we had an appeal earlier that if some of you at the back would like to sit close at the front, I promise you won't be penalized. In fact, if you continue sitting at the back, maybe I'll point you and ask the person who is furthest back will be forced to make the first speech. So, thank you very much for joining this session. In economics, we often talk about recovery. Meaning, which in economics we mean after the economy has been hit by a shock, what is the process of recovering to the place where it was before? And we know that in this modern era, there are many shocks that face economies and many shocks that face economies of cities. So we've had, most obviously, economic shocks, the economic crises that we see in cities. There are water shortages and droughts that we have seen in cities. There has been the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, obviously. And also, last year, we saw social unrest emerging as a major shock to cities. And so the question is, how do cities respond to these shocks and recover from these shocks? How do we become resilient? So I think since the COVID pandemic, before the COVID pandemic, the role of institutions was to be sustainable. But since then, the idea of resilience has been added. How can you be both sustainable but also resilient against these various shocks that hit us? We can think of crises that are facing cities in two ways. One of them you could say is chronic. You know, in healthcare, there's a distinction between a chronic condition and an acute condition. An acute condition is the one that requires you to go to hospital immediately. A chronic condition is more like something that you live with each and every day but affects your health. So we have chronic stresses in our cities, and amongst those chronic problems that we have in our cities, inequality and exclusion, the exclusionary city, is one of the big kind of chronic problems we have. But then as I said, we have these acute crises of social unrest, climate-related crises, social and economic crises. So what this panel is I hope going to do is unpack the strategies and approaches for building resilience within cities. What strategies are best suited for the South African context, and how could these strategies be funded, of course, is always an important problem. So we want to try and interrogate how South African cities have previously responded to shocks and stresses, and how have they recovered. To help me unpack, okay, I should have probably started off and say, although I was introduced by the MC, my name is Michael Sachs. I work at Wits University. I have a great panel with me. On my immediate left is Miss Lindiwe Kwele, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Gauteng Partnership Fund, which is a capital raising and implementation agency of the Gauteng Department of Human Settlements. And I think we have some of the good work of the Partnership Fund being displayed behind me. On her left is Ms. Thulisiwe Hangana. She is the Executive Manager at the Buffalo City Metropolitan Development Agency. She has many years of experience of working with mega projects, including in state-owned companies, Transnet and Eskom. But now she is applying those skills in Buffalo City. On her left, we have Mr. Eric Dickson. He's a senior urban development and disaster risk management specialist at the World Bank Group, with over 15 years of interdisciplinary experience in urban development, disaster risk management, and water supply and sanitation. Last but not least, on his left is Dr. Caroline Poschl, who has 12 years, who's at PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, in their South Africa Cities and Urbanization team, which has been working with cities on COVID-19 recovery projects. So thank you all very much for joining us. I want to just open with contributions from the panel, after which we will have a discussion and also open it to the audience. So beginning with you, Lindiwe, how do mega projects and human settlements planning in the Gauteng space, how is it assisting us with these challenges of resilience, inclusion and recovery?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. As the Gauteng Partnership Fund, as you have alluded, that we are the entity of the Department of Human Settlement, we play a critical role as the implementing agent on behalf of the province, but working very closely with the cities in creating inclusive and livable spaces. The way we see ourselves playing a role in that regard is to really contribute to spatial justice and spatial transformation. We all appreciate our history as South Africans, where we inherited cities that are creating exclusion or division. And I think cities need to be intentional in their strategies to ensure that they create inclusive societies and that they are able to leverage resources to create inclusivity and create spaces where people can work, live, and play. We all appreciate, Mark, that by 2050, I think it's the study that was done by the World Bank long time ago, that by 2050, more than 70% of the world population will be residing in cities. And as the Gauteng province, we are not immune from that. We know that we are, as much as we are the smallest province in terms of the land size, but in terms of the population, we quite big in that regard. And if you're looking at the backlog of housing, we are sitting at 1 million, I like money, I'm saying rent. We are sitting at 1 million backlog of housing. And the role that we've been playing as a GPF then was to look at how do we actually work with various municipalities in creating livable spaces and also ensuring that we leverage off the levers of state using state-owned land to create opportunities closer to where economic opportunities are. We know that the poorest of the poor, they're the ones who bear the brunt, where they have to use public transport, spending the little that they have in accessing economic opportunities. So I urge municipalities that in their planning, we need to make sure that we create opportunities for people to work closest to where economic opportunities are. But also as the GPF, our role also in the context of the formalization of informal settlement, as you have alluded to, creating resilient cities, we've got to ensure that we are mindful of the harsh realities of the climate change. You know, our alternative technologies, right now we are busy rolling out alternative sewer technologies in our quest to respond to the resilient imperatives, but also just dealing with issues of formalization and also ensuring that we use space optimally and that we create awareness and educate people and also be intentional in creating inclusivity. So as far as we are concerned as the GPF, we see our role as a catalyst in the integrated human settlement, but at the same time playing a huge role in creating opportunities because we are also in the lending space whereby we are intentional in targeting historically disadvantaged property developers. We know that in the property development sector, the barriers to entry are quite high, and as the GPF, we also have developed various product offerings that are intentional in dealing with the divide in also creating economic inclusion. So we're not only looking at development just from a perspective of just human settlement alone, but from an economic development perspective, also creating inclusion, creating livable spaces, but ensuring that there's long-term sustainability for municipalities. Also, I believe that municipalities need to start thinking out of the box. I think World Bank in 2015, 2016, you were still at the National Treasury. I think by then when they did the study around cost of doing businesses in municipalities, I think it's almost 7 years now. But now that I'm in the human settlement space, I'm frustrated that the turnaround times to deal with applications, you know, for developers, because they are also a huge contributor to the sustainability of municipalities. So municipalities, as part of their post-recovery, post-COVID recovery strategies, they need to work smarter, they need to be agile. Whilst they still have to adhere to the Municipal Finance Management Act, I believe that they can maneuver and really become an effective partner in driving resilient, smarter, and livable cities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lindiwe. Thuli, unfortunately, you're the next in the firing line, just because the bullet is going in this direction. So, of course, Buffalo City is maybe a different from Gauteng, but maybe has some similar challenges. How do you reflect on your work there?
Yes. Thank you, Prof. I think I decided to look at the economic recovery and resilience just from a practical point of view in the way we do things in Buffalo City. So I would just like to give the audience just an overview of just the programs that we are undertaking as part of resilience and economic recovery. The first program that we have is the Integrated Beachfront Program. And in that program, we have two state-of-the-art recreational facilities. The first one being called Court Crescent. It's in Esplanade, and where it's located, it's near the hotels and it's near the sea. It's got state-of-the-art facilities. We've got outdoor equipment. We've got amphitheaters to host outdoor events. And we also have hawker stalls so that people who want to trade in the facility can just register and trade there. And then the second one, it's called the Waterworld Fun Park. It's as the name says, it's a water slide facility that we are busy constructing right now. And it also has some facilities. You go there, the facilities there, you find facilities for adults, and there's also facilities for children. For instance, there's skating, there's bicycle tracks, and there's also hawker stalls. And also there's also outdoor equipment as well. And also there's a amphitheater, which is a little bit bigger than the Court Crescent one. It's got a capacity of, I think, just about over 1,000. So that's the Integrated Beachfront Program, which we're currently busy with as part of the economic recovery. And we're employing, we have created quite a number of jobs there, and also the SMMEs that are involved in the construction of those facilities. And then secondly, we've got a program which we call the BIDS. It's Business Improvement Districts. So in that program, we look at the safety and security of the city. And at this stage, that program is only at the East London. We have not gone out to other areas. For now, we are just focusing on the East London CBD. So we have deployed security guards around the city just to make sure that the city is safe. And I must say, based on the reports that we get, we have reduced crime quite drastically. And then just on the infrastructure development, I think those who are based in East London would remember the Settlers Way construction project, which is currently happening. And it's causing a lot of inconvenience for people who are going to airport. And the idea of that project, in fact, is just to manage traffic, because as is in the Buffalo City, if you're from outside of Buffalo City and you're going to airport, there's only one way, and it goes through the city. So right now we are constructing the Settlers Way. We are upgrading it, and also part of that project, we are constructing a bypass so that you only go through the city if it's really necessary. But if it's not necessary, then you can just bypass and go straight to the airport. So that's one of the programs. And we also have also a program that is managing the traffic within the city. We are busy with the Breitbach interchange, which is the project. It's on the N2 between East London and Qonce. And because currently, when you go to Qonce and Dimbaza and all the towns that are within the Qonce surrounding, you have to drive through King Williamstown, and then you have to go to wherever you are going. So now the idea of this Breitbach interchange is that at some point on the N2, you have to then divert and take the direction that you want to direct. So those are the infrastructure development projects that we are busy with. And they're employing quite a number of residents of the city. And also, I think just looking at now from the resilience point of view, we have a project which we call Duncan Village Waste Management and Buyback Center. The idea of the project is that we train the residents on recycling and reuse as well. So as part of that project, we are currently collecting waste and we are counting the waste that we collect. So by now we have an idea that the waste that we are collecting, it gives us an idea that we actually need a permanent processing plant. And thus far, based on the waste that we have collected, we realize that in the city, we actually need a paper processing plant as well as the glass processing plant based on the number of the waste that we are collecting within the city. But the problem right now is that all the waste that we are collecting, because we don't have a processing plant, we have to take the waste, we transport the waste outside of the city to other cities. So now the second component of that project is the infrastructure development, which we're planning to develop then the buyback center, which will also have the processing plant to process mainly the waste that we know we collected more, which is now the paper and the glass. And also looking at the projects that are on the pipeline currently, we have East London airport expansion. We are in the planning stage with that project, but we also have challenges because we want to expand the airport, but the land that we are supposed to use for expansion has been illegally occupied. So we're still busy with those processes right now. And also as part of the projects that are in the pipeline, I think most people don't even know that we have a racetrack in East London. We actually have a racetrack. We are now almost ready to start with the construction for the upgrade of the East London racetrack, also to attract tourism within the city. And also the collaboration that we have with East London IDZ as well as Transnet. We are now in the planning stage of developing the Port of East London, as well as building a waterfront. So in the near future, we're going to have a proper waterfront in East London. And because we are trying to create economic nodes outside of East London, because people always make a mistake to think that Buffalo City is East London. So at this stage, we are trying to create other economic nodes outside of the East London so that people can go to Be Sure, for instance, or Gongce. So we have projects that we're currently busy with in those areas because we don't want people to make a mistake of thinking that when there's a infrastructure development project, it would be within the East London. In fact, the way we have divided the city, we've divided the city into 5 clusters, specifically for the purposes of allocating resources, so that we allocate resources not only to one area, but to other areas. So you would have the rural area, for instance, as the cluster, and then you have the township as the cluster. So when we allocate resources, we look at the priorities within those clusters. Based on the public participation, we then prioritize the programs within all the clusters, and that's how we plan economy within the city. And also because as the development agency, we have another responsibility, which is tourism development. So as part of the tourism, currently we are busy developing what we call the tourism route development. We don't have the city sightseeing buses yet, but the idea is that we're going to have the buses. But for now, we are developing the tourism, so the tourism route development, so that when you are in East London, when you land or you arrive in East London, you get a pamphlet which tells you exactly, we are trying to create stories per station. So when you're in East London, we're generating storylines about East London. And then when you move to Dimbaza, for instance, then you read a storyline about Dimbaza. When you move to Mdantsane, then you read a storyline about Mdantsane. So we are now currently busy developing that tourism route so that we can create pamphlets that will assist people who are visitors in East London to understand, the Buffalo City, to understand the history of all these stations in the. And I think as
I might have to interrupt you.
Okay.
There's too much going on in East London, I think. I will have to divert because often I take my kids to Kabeja for holidays.
Yeah.
They have a wonderful beachfront there, but it sounds like East London is the place now that we will have to go.
No, you have to come to Buffalo City.
Yeah, fantastic.
Thank you, Prof.
Let me go to Eric, who has also worked, I think, in South Africa, but also in some other countries in Africa outside of South Africa. And of course, the infrastructure we've discussed is important, but also climate resilience is an important aspect. So Eric, what can you tell us?
Thanks very much. Well, what I can tell you is that from the World Bank's perspective, the issue of urban resilience has really become center stage in terms of an investment priority. And you know, the question is why? Well, the numbers really speak for themselves. When we launched a report, now is a number of years ago, back in about 2015 or 2016, the numbers showed that an annual loss of approximately $314 billion would be the result of impacts of disasters on cities. That had the potential of pushing about 77 million people globally, urban citizens, back into poverty. So the imperative, I think, speaks for itself. But let me reflect then on what that means, perhaps, you know, here in Africa. If we compare 1970 to 1979 with 2000 to 2020, what we've seen in Africa is the frequency of drought events has tripled, the frequency of storm events has quadrupled, and the frequency of flood events has increased by a factor of 10. So again, the numbers are stark. And I want to bring that last number about the frequency of floods back to what our colleague was talking about in the last session on SMMEs and my experience in Dar es Salaam, where I lived for many years before relocating here. A flood event in downtown Dar es Salaam that lasted 4 days cost the city over $100 million in losses to the citizens and the businesses of the affected area. And why was that important? Because the local mechanics who had their businesses, they couldn't get to their shops because they were attending to different issues. You know, the impact on repairs, on people moving to schools and having to stay home was absolutely impacted. So again, these numbers are extremely stark, and we know the numbers from Durban in April of this past year. And so let's now bring that here to South Africa. We've done some analysis regarding disaster risk financing in this country that shows a 57% increase in weather-related disaster events over the last 2 decades. And so again, you know, these numbers really show us that investing strategically, intentionally, as Lindiwe was just mentioning, in issues around resilience and risk reduction within cities is really critical. And I think that there's a number of ways that this can be done, but I do think that there's somewhat of a structural problem, not just here in South Africa, but globally, is that when a disaster hits, and then we saw this, you know, for example, in Kenya, which had a very prolonged drought, an international appeal would go out and funds would flow into the country. The question is, should we not be investing upfront to reduce the impact rather than providing hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in relief funding? Because our numbers show that a single dollar that is invested in preparedness and reduction is equal to 15 on the other side on the response. So again, the numbers really speak for themselves. So if I want to land that here in South Africa and reflecting on how cities can invest for improved resilience and therefore better recovery and a shorter recovery period, really I would argue that it needs to be, you know, take a multi-sectoral approach, number one, so a spatial approach, but looking at issue of risk information. Do we have the data in cities to be able to take informed investment decisions? If the answer is no, then you know where your immediate priority can be in terms of investing in those monitoring systems. Second, on risk reduction. So taking that information and then putting it into the design parameters of your infrastructure. In Colombia, no publicly financed investment project will go ahead unless it has been screened at a number of different levels for disaster risk. And that's in order to safeguard the public purse. And I would argue that design, the incorporation of risk in design elements needs to then be carried through into the asset management and the operation and maintenance of those facilities. And if we reflect again on what happened in KZN in April, we know that there was a climate event without question. But that climate event was also coupled with issues around regular routine maintenance. And that applies to many different cities around the globe, certainly not just Durban. I also want to underscore the role of communities. And I think Edgar touched on this earlier on today in terms of that bottom-up approach. Getting the insight of the communities that are impacted is absolutely critical in terms of taking that into account for design. And again, in Dar es Salaam, where we had nearly a year of consultation with affected communities, that they were able to input their experiences, and it wasn't extremely scientific. They would say the floodwaters went up to here on my house, or went up to here, and the engineers could begin to take that into account. And so I think that by investing strategically in risk identification, risk reduction, but then recognizing that no city is a fortress, there's going to be shocks, and that city is going to need to respond. And that response is going to be contingent upon good information, understanding where your facilities are and what those facilities contain, in order to be able to distribute it across the city or the region, as it were, and ensuring that your personnel are adequately capacitated and trained, and there's a routine process of training, exercises, and drills, because the saying is, train hard, fight easy. And getting that culture of regular training, I think, is absolutely critical. So we've done some modeling related to our work on the Climate Country Development Report for cities that show that, if you invest in X, Y, or Z type of interventions, the returns would be this. We have 9 different policy levers. I think Edgar this morning presented 5. We have 9 different policy levers that show different prioritizations of investments. And finally, I wanted to conclude, observations from an urban planning perspective as well. Lindiwe, you talked about the harsh realities of climate change within the urban space, and I think that this is really critical from a spatial perspective. Because we've just concluded a very interesting study with Ekurhuleni and with Joburg regarding heat.
Yeah.
And we've seen the impact of heat in Europe this past summer, in America. And what we're seeing is, in terms of who is the most exposed, it's unsurprising, it is the poorest areas of these cities that are experiencing temperatures of up to 6.5 degrees difference in Joburg and Ekurhuleni between the leafy northern suburbs and downtown Ekurhuleni and Joburg. And so taking those considerations into account in terms of investing in greening and housing design are absolutely fundamental in my view. I'll stop there. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. And I think that leads very well on to Caroline, because of course we can talk about resilience and recovery in general, but often it's the most vulnerable who are at the brunt of these kinds of shocks, whether they be environmental or economic or social. Yeah. And South Africa has some of the most exclusionary urban spaces perhaps in the world. So I wonder, Caroline, I don't think you have the answer to those questions, but how would you reflect on how we should approach thinking about those things?
Yeah, I think definitely working towards that inclusive growth is really key. I suppose, we have 2 elements here. We have resilience and recovery. In terms of resilience, I'd say in terms of a resilient economy is a diversified one. So you have different sectors and you have a large participation of the population in the economy. And of course, different sectors rotate through different cycles of prosperity and leanness. So you don't want to be dependent on just 1 or 2 sectors in your economy. You want to make sure that it's diversified enough so that when there's a crisis, you still have some sectors that can be thriving. So for example, Cape Town had invested since about 2007, 2010. They started together with the DTIC, bringing in or really investing in the global professional services industry. This is sort of business process offshoring and sort of your call centers, etc. And so when COVID hit, while other sectors like the hospitality sector seriously suffered, and there are a lot of job losses, this new sector of global business processes completely thrived. So suddenly, these online services became really important, and thousands of jobs were actually created, and people who lost their jobs in the hospitality industry could move to this other sector during that crisis. So that's really something that can help resilience. Another issue, of course, is financial sustainability. You always want to have, as a city, a buffer so that when you do have a crisis, you're able to respond. You don't need to suddenly ask for raise resources. You want to be able to act fast and support struggling sectors, etc. So in terms of your recovery, I think one issue is really, one key element is to reprioritize, and that also partly means refocusing on what's really essential. Those businesses and those industries that have the most return in terms of jobs and other socioeconomic elements. So you want to invest in those businesses that will give you the highest jobs, not just direct jobs, but also indirectly, and that can spur economic activity quickly. So for instance, also like your construction business, if you build infrastructure, that's something brilliant to do in order to recover, because that's a lot of, there's sort of short-term jobs that are created, but it's a lot of jobs. So that's, that's something where you would want to focus. And you want to make sure that all of your departments in the city are actually geared towards that recovery. And because I feel that a lot of city departments aren't even aware of how important their role is in the recovery. So for example, as you mentioned, Lindiwe, like the turnaround of getting your construction permit, that person in that office needs to understand that their role is so important to ensure that those investors will not get disgruntled and go to another city. You need to make sure that that process is smooth and that that those permits can be done quickly, because for a developer, that lost time is extremely expensive if there are delays in the construction. So yeah, those are just some of the elements. And then you want to be able to make concessions and support struggling sectors. So for instance, during the COVID-19 crisis or in the aftermath of that, Cape Town invested heavily in the hospitality industry, which was heavily hit. So this included, for example, internationally lobbying for Cape Town tourism, working with visa authorities to ensure that tourist visas would be easy to attain and people can come in. It also included urban development planning, so repurposing spaces to get more sort of sidewalk cafes available, pedestrian areas, and then also ensuring that there's safety, so safe and clean spaces that are accessible to tourists but also to businesses through better law enforcement and increased waste management. So that combination as well of support that a city can provide is really key, and there's really a lot a city can do from different angles. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Such a rich buffet of issues and perspectives that I just want to check with the audience that you can raise your hand at any moment to come in with a question if there's a question you would like to ask from the audience. But if not, we will proceed to with our discussion. I wonder, Lindiwe, I mean, in terms of these types of risks, the climate risks that we face, is there, I mean, how do you begin to think about that as a developer, which I think is what you are, really, a public developer as opposed to a private developer? But is it about the design of the infrastructure? Is it about the processes and the institutions you build around that infrastructure? How do you think about it?
I think it's all encompassing. And maybe before I even answer that question, maybe as the GPF, for those who are not familiar with what we do and what we offer in terms of just our product offering, we have an empowerment entrepreneur property fund. And I think that is the one that really intentionally respond to the issues of economic recovery, because that is the product that really focus on previously disadvantaged property developers in the rental property space. And it's purely meant for 100% BE property developers. And even our offering in terms of our rates, we offer favorable rates in that particular product portfolio. We also ensure that there is an incentive of a 2 million rand interest-free loan. And then we also give you a tax holiday during the construction period, because we understand the issues of access to finance and just the issues of navigating your way. So as part of your hand-holding approach, we also we are intentional in that particular product. And then the rental housing fund, which is, we are treating that one as a purely commercial product. But again, you have to also have a 51% BEE shareholding. And then the social housing fund, which works with your social housing institutions, and student accommodation fund. As an institution in Gauteng province, we know that we are blessed with various academic institutions. So we see ourselves playing a role in responding and assisting in ensuring that we respond to the demand of student accommodation. February next year, we will be launching a Kasi for Real, a product that really begins to address the shortages in terms of the housing shortages in the township. It's contributing to the township regeneration. So in terms of the infrastructure investment, as the GPF, we partner with Council for Built Council for Built Environment because they do have the market intelligence, and we are utilizing all that insight and all that market insight to actually capacitate our property developers that come to us. So not only are we dealing with issues of access to finance, but also access to information, because it is in our best interest to make sure that they actually deliver and develop product that is resilient, product that will outlive all of us, and also taking into consideration climate change realities. One needs to look at alternative built technologies that are resilient, that will actually also create sound returns for them as property developers. And also in terms of the municipality, we know, for instance, how Tshwane has a problem of, they have a problem of the soil,
Dolomite,
the
maybe.
dolomitic soil environment. And as the entity, we also do advise property developers that wants to develop around that particular area. We do have market insight and surveys and research work that we assist them with before we even prioritize and fund those projects. But just looking at Gauteng in its entirety, we make sure that we fund projects that will ensure integration. Because in the past, people will just come in and they will be funded without really taking into consideration in terms of where exactly is this person wanting to build this, because you don't want to exacerbate urban sprawling, because we need to densify, we need to ensure that there's efficiencies and that there's economic opportunities, and we need to be a stimulator, a catalyst for economic development. So in essence, and even Wits University, in the built environment space, in the planning space, we work hand in glove, because as the institution ourselves, we need to also strive for continuous improvement. We need to also benchmark and make sure that we are still relevant as an institution, so that there's sustainability in the work that we are doing. So in essence, that's where we are as the GPF, yeah.
Thank you. I want to encourage audience participation, and I have a volunteer here, so please go ahead. You can, yeah. I don't know if there's a roving microphone that we can provide.
There's only one mic.
Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Ayanda, and I'm from Exotically Divine, NPC, non-profit company. I will say we started just recently to intensify on the work just after COVID, so talking about recovering. I have a question. We are based here in the inner city, right in the hot 16 Twist Street, in the oldest building called Drill Hall. And it used to be the heritage site. And my question is, we already started working in the space to also try to keep the building alive, because lots of buildings here in the city are empty. The city is becoming a ghost town in a way, but on the other side, we have like very big impact of people who don't have places to stay. But the same people who don't have places to stay, they got ideas, but we don't know like who to really talk to. Like if you see the building, you know how you can make the building alive again, you know how you can use the building again, but you don't know like who to talk to and what are the rights. And yeah, I'll just end it there.
So I would say that's very useful, the picture that you've painted. And I'll ask my panel to talk, but also other people in the audience might be able to offer some answers to you directly in terms of the question you're posing. Does anyone want to? Yeah, Lindy.
No, thank you, Ayanda. I think for me, just from a GPF perspective, if you were to come to us, obviously you have to have some rights to that particular property, because we don't want to create lawlessness. We need to make sure that you have access to the property, whether through a land availability agreement or a long-term tenure. Once you have that and you have a solid business case as part of refurbishing that place, you can actually do it as an affordable rental stock, or even do a conversion into a student accommodation. But once you actually have a secured access to that particular land and we have a clear business plan, you could come to us, we could actually assist. But it starts with ownership, because we need to know who's the bona fide owner of that particular property. Yeah.
Let's have Eric as well. Yeah.
Just one other suggestion, if I may. I know that the Department of, DCOG Provincial at Gauteng is actively pursuing a line of work on revitalization of CBDs across the entire province. There's shockingly to me, there's 152, I think, in Gauteng alone. And so to not necessarily go with a narrow view and look perhaps broader in the overall region, you could also talk to COGTA.
I have another question. I have two, let's take a few. There's a lady with the microphone, then there's one behind there, and then lastly the gentleman at the front, and then we'll take it back to the panel. Yeah.
Good day, everyone. My name is Keleto, and I'm from the city of Johannesburg. I'm a town planner, and I just want to answer the lady. She asked about like land use rights. You can come to us. We based on the Metro Center. If you see a building and you don't know who owns it and what are the rights, you can come to town planners. We're on the 7th floor and the 5th floor Metro Center. We're going to give you the rights. We're going to tell you who the owner is. Sometimes it's owned by the municipality, so you can go to JPC and discuss how you can lease it or buy it from them.
Fantastic. So inclusive growth is even being facilitated here. Let's go to the lady there at the back. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm not going to stand. My name is Tshegang Chipeya. I'm from eThekwini Municipality. I'm together with my colleague next to me. I just wanted to comment on some interesting comments and the discussion from, I think it's Eric from the World Bank. So, you know, obviously eThekwini has, it's experienced everything we have. And I just found it interesting how you mentioned that cities should look at ways to assess their risk or have risk indicators, something like that. And I thought we'd maybe share one of the ways that we tried to address that. So at the time of the flooding, we looked at our 100-year floodplain together with my colleagues sitting next to me. So we're from the Economic Development Unit and we're from the Policy, Strategy, Research, Innovation side. So we took our 100-year floodplain and overlaid that with our valuation role so that we could identify hotspots in the sense that every city knows from its valuation role where the highest value properties are, not in the sense of the rich, but which maybe manufacturing or which properties contribute most to the economy, overlaid with the 100-year floodplain, so you know where the risk is in that sense. So from an economic perspective, we put together that model, and that's now influenced the discussions and the search for funding, whatever, within the city in terms of which areas to prioritize. So I thought I'd share that, but also I'm quite interested to know how other cities, maybe they're not as susceptible to flooding as we are, maybe it's other risk factors, but how other cities identify risk areas, or what risk indicators other cities are using, and also maybe from the World Bank, what best case or best practice there is out there in terms of how cities should be assessing risk or identifying risk. So yes, thanks. That's
thank you. And lastly, gentleman at the front here. Am I right to say that we're given an extra 15 minutes, or what? Are we expected to be closing now? I heard a rumor that we were allocated an extra 15 minutes. I don't know if it's true, but go ahead, sir. Okay, thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Sinayam Kolombane. I represent the Professional Board in Project Management. I've got two questions to the panel. I think the first one, it goes to Ms. Hangana. I am elated, and the way she was articulating their grand plans about Buffalo City and the things that they're gonna do. Now my question is that when I look at the BC, like Buffalo City municipality, it is surrounded by impoverished, some of the municipalities are impoverished, especially the Amatole, Wartambo and Krisani. Now, how are you planning to mitigate any migration into the city given some of the infrastructure projects that are undertaking? Do you have any collaboration initiatives that you're undertaking jointly with them so as to mitigate it? And then my second question, it goes to the panel. There's this new act on the Land Expropriation Act. And given the grand capital programs that you're planning to undertake, how are you planning to insulate your developments against such an act? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think given now our time constraints, what I'll do is just ask, I know specific questions were posed to particular panelists, but let me just start in reverse order with Caroline and say if there's anything you would like to add to the conversation, and we can then come back in this direction on the panelists.
Maybe just a point around inner city rehabilitation. So that's an area that we've looked at a little bit. And what we found was very important there was really a combination of incentives from different levels of government, and a sort of a package of different activities that tends to work best. I mean, there are some prime examples that you probably know about. Braamfontein, for example. There it seemed to work where you had national treasury, property rate incentives, but then you also had efforts to improve security for the businesses, and then this kind of takes on its own life, improved waste removal, etc., and different investments in that specific node. So that's something that that usually works when you stack different activities and different incentives in one area, and then it will automatically grow and expand on its own. So there's been a bit of a setback with COVID, but I'm hoping that we can rehabilitate the city again.
Thank you. Eric?
Thanks very much. I'll try to be brief in the interest of time. I think the questions that were directed towards me were around indicators and then best practice. And firstly, just to also flag and acknowledge the excellent work that the city of eThekwini has done, especially using the GIS systems and being able to have those dashboards that I've seen, which I think are exemplary. Now, what I think is important is that some cities are very sensitive about risk information and land value. If I take, for example, the case of Mexico City, they have a risk atlas, but because of seismic risk in that city, it's not something that is public because of the issues around rates and taxes. And so there's not always a one-size-fits-all. I mean, obviously the risk profile of eThekwini is very different than some of the other cities, and I think that differentiated approach, because The rates and taxes that are generated from the South Durban Basin, for example, are remarkably different, and therefore the interventions for risk reduction and risk communication need to be customized for that part of the city compared to where you're going to get where you experienced larger numbers of fatalities but less economic damage. And so I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all. But what I would say is that investing time and resources in ensuring that early warning systems from national to provincial to local to communities are effective and understood is absolutely critical. So in terms of a best practice, that would be one. My final comment in terms of a best practice is many cities and countries have the issue of risk and risk information and response somewhat buried perhaps in a directorate or a department, and best practice is to elevate that because it is a multi-sectoral issue by nature, and so therefore having it at a higher level within the institution, perhaps under the city manager, is something that is advisable. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thuli, there was a particular question for you, but you're also free to comment on any other aspect.
Thank you, Prof. I think let me answer the question first before I wrap up. Yes, we in Buffalo City, we are actually the home of the Eastern Cape capital town, which is Bisho, because Bisho is the capital town of Eastern Cape. So we have close proximity to the government offices in Bisho, the premier offices. So yes, we are one of the municipality that collaborates with almost all the municipalities within the province. So yes, we collaborate with other municipalities, and we also collaborate with businesses within the city, and in fact sometimes even the businesses that are outside of the city. So I think I've answered that question. And I wanted to respond, in fact, to what Lindiwe was saying about the delay in construction permits and stuff like that. And I wanted to say in the Buffalo City, we actually learned the hard way, because the city released some land parcels for us to find investors and developers. And we actually did. And during the process, because the construction permits, they delay, and the investors, they get discouraged. And we've lost some of the investment deals. And we had to go out again and advertise those land parcels. But we had investors that were discouraged because the processes take longer. As a result now, as the development agency of Buffalo City, it is one of our value propositions to make sure that we are the runner for our investors. So from the minute that you inquire about investing in the city, as the development agency, we make sure that whatever you need, we are there to make sure that we facilitate that process. So yeah, I think that's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Lindy, the final word is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think for me, on the issue, I mean, right now I know there's a whole buzz around the Section 25 of the Constitution in terms of land expropriation, but municipalities do have right of expropriation in terms of the bylaws. It's just that they are not effectively implementing that. And I'm saying if we are serious about regeneration of the inner cities, because that's where bulk infrastructure is, it's a low-hanging fruit to actually derive value. So it's about being decisive, it's about being efficient, it's about doing your work, enforce bylaws, and actually also through the IGR process, partner with one another to derive value. South Africa now is being ranked as one of the most unequal society, and I believe that the state can use its lever to address inclusion, to address inequality, but at the same time create economic opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and mindful of the time, and I'll see our MC is coming on stage again. Thank you very much to the panel and to the audience, especially those that asked us questions. We will continue with the conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you.